Okay, lest there be some parent somewhere who's feeling guilty because I try and read to my kids and they'll see things and like maybe they don't do that. I want to show you. Give me your ball. Give me your ball. This is my daughter's dinner tonight. I mean, she's got some apple too, but this is my daughter's dinner tonight. Now, this over here is peanut butter, and this over here is Nutella. And in case you can't tell from the perspective, there's twice as much Nutella as peanut butter in this bowl. So, you know, there's no perfect parent, despite what you see on the internet. Alright. Elliot, in case you're wondering, is eating peanuts and apple tonight. So it's okay, right?
Yeah. We all have very weird dinners mostly.
Y'all are weird children. Why do you think you're weird? Is it because I raised you?
Yes.
Okay. Chapter 8. Gather, gather, it's gather day. No work for us and threads away. Stalls are building, squares swept clear. Gather all from far and near. Bring your marks and bring your wares. Bring your family for theirs. Food and drink and fun and song. The hold flag flies, so gather along. What's wrong with the hold? Manoli asked Peemer the next morning as she, the boy, and Camo were feeding the fire lizards. Peemer kept craning his neck past the roofs of the harbor hall to see the fire heights of Fort Hold. Nothing's wrong. I want to see if the gather flag's up. Gather flag? Manoli recalled that Sibel had mentioned a gather. Sure. It's spring and sunny. It's a rest day. Thread's not due, so there ought to be a gather. What? What are you doing? Oh, we'll fix it later. Peemer regarded her for a long moment. Then his face screwed up into an incredulous expression. You mean you don't have gathers? Half Circle is isolated, Manoli replied defensively, and with thread falling. Yeah, I forgot that. No wonder you're such a smashing musician, he said, shaking his head as if this were no real compensation. Nothing to do but practice. Still, he added somewhat skeptical, you must have had gathers before thread started. Of course we did. Traders came through the marshes 3 and 4 times a turn. Peemer was unimpressed. Manoli realized that she herself had only the vaguest memories of such events. Threadfall had started when she was barely 8 years old. 8 turns old. We have gathers as often as it's sunny on a rest day, Peemer said, chattering away, and there isn't any thread due. Of course, our being a hold with several small craft halls, as well as the main harbor craft hall, does make for great gathers. You don't happen, and he cocked his head slyly, to have any marks on you. Marks? Peemer was thoroughly disgusted with her obtuseness. Marks! Marks! What you get in exchange for what you're selling at a gather? He reached into his pocket and pulled out 4 small white pieces of highly polished wood, on which the numerals 32 had been incised on one side and on the other, the mark of the smithcraft. Only 30 seconds, but with 4 I've got an 8th, and smithcraft at that. Manoli had never actually seen marks before. All trading transactions had been carried out by her father, the sea holder. She was astonished that so young a boy as Peemer had possession of marks, and said so. Oh, I sang, you know, even before I got apprenticed. I'd always get a mark of some amount or other. My foster mother kept them for me until I came here. Peemer wrinkled his nose in disgust. But you don't get paid for singing at gathers if you're a harper, and you have to do your turn anyway. I haven't anything to give the marksman here. I keep trying, but Master Durant won't put his seal on my pipes, so I have to figure out other ways of turning the odd. Hey, look, Manoli! And he grabbed her arm. There goes the flag! There'll be a gather. He went flying across the court as fast as he could to the apprentice dormitory. On the top of the Fort Hold fire heights, Manoli now saw the bright yellow pennant, and flapping below it on the mast, the red and black barred streamer that apparently signaled a gather. She heard Peemer's cries echoing in the apprentice dormitory, and the sounds of sleepers stirring in complaint. As if Peemer's sighting of the pennant had been a signal, the drudges, herded by Abuna and Sylvina, entered the kitchen. The flag and pennant on the hold mast were duly noted, and the meal preparations were conducted in a cheerful humor. Manoli dispersed her fare to their sunning and bathing, and finding Sylvina in the kitchen with Abuna, offered to take breakfast to the harper and his bronze, whom he named Zare. I told you, Abuna, that with Manoli to help, 2 more fire lizards would be no problem, Sylvina said, pushing the kitchen woman onto some other task as she smiled warmly at Manoli. Not that the Harper will be here much with his, nor Sibel either. She called to Abuna, who went off grumbling to herself. Long as she's lived in the Harper Hall, you'd think she'd be used to change about. Manoli wanted to ask Sylvina about the girls and their gossiping, but Sylvina was avoiding her eye. Just then they both heard Manoli's name being called in a frantic voice. Sibel came crashing down the kitchen steps, holding up his trousers with one bare arm, wincing at the clutch of his fire lizard queen on the other. Kimi was creeling wildly with hunger. Manoli! There you are. I've been searching everywhere. What's the matter with her? Ouch! Sibel was wide-eyed with anxiety. She's only hungry. Only hungry? Here, come with me. And Manoli took Sibel by the arm, picked up the tray she had prepared for the Master Harper, and pulled the journeyman out of the kitchen to spare him Abuna's black scowl, and into the relative peace of the dining hall. Now feed her. I can't. My pants. Sibel nodded to his trousers, which, beltless, threatened to slip off his hips. Stifling a giggle, Manoli unbuckled her own worn belt and secured Sibel's pants for him. He grabbed a handful of meat and held it out for Kimi. The ungrateful wretch hissed and lunged at the meat, digging her claws into his forearm. Well, Manoli couldn't give him her tunic, too. She spotted a scrap of toweling by the service hatch. Deftly, she disengaged the queen's legs from Sibel's forearm and wrapped the cloth about his scratched and bleeding arm, then managed to redeposit Kimi before the queen was aware of being shifted. Oh, thank you, sighed Sibel, sinking to the nearest bench. And you had 9 of these creatures to feed every day? He gave her a look of renewed respect. I don't know how you did it, I really don't. Manoli pointed to his claw as she took up a handful of meat. Kimi didn't care whose hand held the meat, so Sibel gratefully gulped some claw. Manoli! Another voice roared from the top of the stairs. Sir? Manoli dashed to the foot of the steps. He's making the most outlandish noises, the Harper yelled. Is he hurt or just hungry? His eyes are flaming red. Here you are, said Sylvina, appearing from the kitchen with a second tray of food for human and fire lizard. I thought we'd be hearing from him once Sibel appeared. Manoli could not keep from laughing with Sylvina. She took the steps 2 at a time without spilling so much as a drop of the claw or tumbling a glob of meat from the piled bowl. The Harper had taken time to dress, and he thought to wrap his arm against the needle-sharp claws of his little bronze, but he looked not a whit less harried or distressed than Sibel. You're sure it's only hunger? Asked Master Robinson, but his fire lizard's creeling abated with the first mouthful of meat. Robinson gestured Manoli toward his quarters, but the fire lizard, believing the food was being withdrawn, let out an indignant shriek and swatted at Manoli's hand. Here, eat, you greedy thing, said the Harper with great affection in his voice. Just don't wake everyone, it's rest day. Too late, remarked Domik in an acid tone of voice, his sleeping rug pulled around him as he stood in the doorway of his room. Between you howling like an injured dragon, Sibel sounding like a flight of them, and these pesky beasts with tones that could bend metal, no one's going to enjoy a rest day. The gather flag is flying, the Harper said in a conciliatory way. He continued to feed Zare as he and Manoli proceeded to his room. A gather? That's all I need. Domik slammed his door. I trust there won't be a repetition of this, said Master Marshall as the Harper and Manoli came abreast of his room. He wore a loose robe, but he obviously had been drawn from his bed by the creelings and shouts. His sour gaze was directed fully on Manoli, as if she were the sole cause of the commotion. Probably, the Harper replied cheerfully, until I figure out this precious creature's habits. He only hatched yesterday. Marshall, do give him a few days' grace. Marshall spluttered something, glared balefully and accusingly at Manoli, and then shut his door, pointedly without slamming it. Manoli all too clearly heard other doors closing along the corridor, and she was very grateful to be in the Harper's company. Don't let old Marshall upset you, Manoli, said Master Robinson in a quiet voice. Manoli looked up quickly, grateful for his reassurance. He smiled again as he nodded for her to enter his room and gestured for her to set the tray down on the center of the sand table. Fortunately, he went on, slouching in a chair, all the while supplying bits of meat for Zare, you don't have to sit classes with Marshall. I don't? Robinson chuckled at the note of relief in her voice, and then laughed again as there missed a morsel, creeled anxiously until the harper had retrieved it from the floor and deposited it neatly in the open mouth. No, you don't. Morsel teaches only at the apprentice level. The master harper sighed. He really is adept at drilling basic theory into rebellious apprentice minds. But Paterian already taught you more than Morsel knows. Relieved, Manoli? Oh, yes. Master Morsel doesn't seem to like me. Master Morsel has always considered it a waste of time and effort to teach any girls. What good would it do them? Manoli blinked, surprised to hear her father's opinion echoed in the Harper Hall. Then she realized that Master Robinson had been speaking in deft mimicry of Master Morshel's testy manner. Warm fingers caught her chin, and she was made to look up at the harper. The lines of fatigue and worry were plainly visible, despite his good night's rest. Morshel's dislike of the feminine sex is a standing joke in this hall, Manoli. Give him the courtesy due his rank and age, and ignore his biased thinking. As I said, you don't have to sit classes with him. Not that Domik will be any easier to study with. He's a hard taskmaster, but Domik will take over your tuition where Paterian left off in musical form and composition until I can. Unfortunately, and the harper's smile of regret was sincere, I am badly pressed for time with all that's happening, much though I would prefer to undertake the task myself. Still, Domik's understanding of the truly classical form is superior, and he's keen to monopolize any instrumentalist capable of playing his intricate music. Don't miss your lessons with Master Schoeniger, for you must be able to sing your songs effectively, but, and he lifted a warning finger, don't fall for Brudigan's importuning about fire lizard choruses. That can be scheduled for a later time when we've settled you properly in your craft. Guys, I'd like you to concentrate on your instruments, as far and as fast as that hand of yours permits. How's it healing, by the way? And he reached for her left hand. You've done too much by the look of those splits. Does it hurt? I won't have you crippling yourself in your zeal, Manoli. Understand that? Manoli, sensing his kind concern, swallowed against the lump in her throat and managed a tentative smile. It is never easy, sweet child, to have a real gift. Something else is withheld to compensate. Manoli was startled at the sadness, that melancholy in his eyes and face, and he went on, almost to himself. If you won't surrender the mark, you'll never be more than half alive. Speaking of marks, and his expression altered completely. He leaned forward across the sand table, rummaging in the compartments of the central bridge built above the actual sand table. Ah, here. And he pressed something in her hand. There's a gather today, and you deserve some relaxation. I suspect diversions were few and infrequent in your sea-hold. Find something pretty to wear at the stalls, a belt perhaps, and buy some of the bubbly pies. Pemer will lead you to them, the scamp. But tomorrow, and Master Robinson waggled a finger at her, back to work for you. Sibel says you make a good copyist. Did you have a chance to polish the Brecky song yesterday evening? I think you'll agree the melodic line falters in the fourth phrase, and he hummed it. Then I want you to rewrite the ballad, observing all the traditional music forms. Think of it as an exercise in musical theory. Mind you, I'm of the opinion that the strength of your work will lie in a looser, less formalized style. There are, however, purists in the craft who must be mollified while you're an apprentice. There, his belly so swollen that the individual lumps of meat could be discerned against his skin, gave a sudden burp and collapsed into sleep in the crook of the harper's arm. I say, Manoli, how long will he do nothing but eat and sleep? The harper sounded disappointed. The first 7 days, maybe a few days longer, Manoli answered, still trying to assimilate his astonishing instructions in philosophy. He'll develop a personality in a very short time. That's a relief. The harper heaved an exaggerated sigh. I'd been worrying that perhaps his brains had got addled going between so much in the egg. Not that I'd care for him any less. And he smiled tenderly down at the sprawled form. How did you ever manage to fill 9 rapacious bellies? Now his smile was all for her. And what a relief to have you here to help us. In this, I am your apprentice." His eyes held hers a moment longer, still twinkling with amusement, although his face settled into a serious expression. "In all other matters, you are to consider yourself my apprentice, you know. Now, you may take the tray back to the kitchen, and you are dismissed to the gather. Unless, of course," he added with that winning smile, "something untoward happens to this fellow." She brought the tray and empty dishes to the kitchen, where Abuna, with more than her usual courtesy, suggested that Manoli had better get some breakfast before it was all gone. They'd be clearing the table soon, and if the lazybones hadn't eaten, too bad. Not but what they couldn't stuff themselves at the gather's stall. That reminded Manoli of the mark that the harper had put in her hand. At first she thought it was the dim light of the passage, but when she got into the entrance hall, she could plainly see that the 2 was underscored. It wasn't a half mark, which would have been scored above. She clenched the precious piece in her fist, amazed. The master harper had given her a whole 2-mark piece to spend on herself. 2 whole marks! Where she could buy anything. No. He had said that she was to buy something pretty to wear. A belt. The harper's keen eye had noted the absence of hers, and it was a worn belt anyhow. But a new one? Instead of one handed down? A belt she could choose for herself? How very kind of Master Robinson. And he'd said she was to buy bubbly pies. She looked about the scattering of boys at the apprentice tables for Peemer's curly head of hair. He was, as usual, deep in conversation with several boys, and probably planning mischief to judge by the closeness of all the heads. There were no masters at the circular table, and just a few journeymen at the oval ones, clustered about Sibel, admiring Kimi asleep on his arm. "She couldn't give 'em away if she wanted to," Peemer was saying in a strident tone as Manoli approached his group. "Someone must have jabbed him in the ribs, because he glanced over his shoulder, and while he looked in no way abashed, it was obvious from the expression of the others that Manoli had been the she he'd meant. Can you," he asked bluntly, "can I what? Give anyone else one of your fire lizards?" "No." "I told you," Peemer pointed an accusing finger at Ranley. "So Sibel couldn't have given Master Robinson the queen, could he, Manoli?" "But the Master Harper should have had the queen," said Ranley, rebellious and unconvinced. "Sibel did offer the queen to Master Robinson when she hatched," Manoli said quickly, "but it was too late. Impression had occurred, and that can't be altered." "Well, just how did Sibel get his hands on the queen egg?" Now Ranley's eyes hotly accused her of complicity. "Completely by accident," she said, mastering her irritation at such an outrageous suggestion. "First, there really isn't any positive way of knowing which is the queen egg in a fire lizard clutch. Second, it isn't anyone's business but Master Robinson's and Sibel's. She'd just lay that divisive rumor into an early grave and repay a little of her great debt to both men. Third, I picked the 2 biggest eggs in the clutch for Master Robinson," and the boys nodded with approval. "But they could have both been bronzes." Then she laughed. It all happened so fast when the eggs started to hatch, no one bothered to see which pot was whose. Master Robinson and Sibel just grabbed because both pots were rocking fit to fall. The little bronze hatched first right into Master Robinson's hands, and that was that right then. He caught it just before it could fall from the hearthstone. The boy snatched in breath for that near catastrophe. And then there was Sibel with the queen in his hands. Then he tried to give her to the harper, but Zare had impressed, and so had little Kimi. There's no way to change that. And I don't want to hear another word from any of you as to who got what and who shouldn't have. There's enough gossip flying about this hall. She wished she could forget her worries about what those girls had told the Lord Holder. "I kept trying to tell them," said Peemer, throwing his hands out, his eyes bright with injured innocence, because Manoli was now glaring at him. Then he clutched dramatically at his throat because his voice had squeaked on the last word. "I've gone hoarse talking." "Can't have the golden throat horse, can we?" said Renly sarcastically. Peemer was testing claw pots on the table to see if there was any that was still warm. Finding one, he poured 2 mugs, offering one to Manoli. He gurgled as he downed half a mug, rubbing his hand across his mouth, and then told her that she'd better eat quickly because they'd be clearing any minute. "Now let's get back to the mark problem. This will be only the second gather of the turn, so I figured that they'll be sending an older journeyman from the Smithcraft Hall to keep an eye on the younger fellows and supervise the bargaining. And that journeyman is just likely to be my father's friend Pergamol. And if it's Pergamall, then I can guarantee that you'll get top marks for your work. And he held up a silencing hand as Ramley opened his mouth to comment. If it isn't Pergamall, it'll be someone who knows it. And if it's just a young journeyman who's on to you, Peemer, Ramley asked in a caustic tone, then I blubber. Peemer dismissed this problem with all the disdain of the practiced dissembler. I'm just a little fella, and I never have much, and I... Great tears welled up in his eyes, and his face was a mask of trusting and anxious innocence. If I may disturb this tactical meeting, said a different voice, and all the boys looked guiltily around to see Sibel, Fire Lizard cradled in his arm, for a few words with Manoli. She rose and followed the journeyman to the window. He pressed her rolled-up belt in her hand as he thanked her for saving his dignity that morning. Now, can I keep Kimmy with me all the time? He asked, lightly stroking the Fire Lizard's folded wings. Even in her sleep, she responded to his touch with a sigh. The more she's with you, the stronger the bond will grow. If not on you, near you. Is she too young to be taught to sit on my shoulder like your beauty does? I've got to have both hands for a while today. When she wakes, put her on your shoulder, Manoli grinned, and get used to having your neck throttled. How often does she eat? She'll let you know. Manoli laughed at Sibel's consternation. At least you don't have to go catch it. Keep a few meat rolls in your belt pouch, although I'm sure Camo will always be ready to chop for you anytime. Sibel chuckled too. One thing you'll need to do daily is oil her skin. Does it have to stink like the stuff you use? Sibel was dismayed. Manoli suppressed a giggle. Master Olddive had that oil on hand. He says he makes it for the ladies of the hold to use on their faces. Oh no. But I'm sure he'd make you something more suitable for your... She paused, not certain just how much she could tease Sibel. My male dignity and rank. Sibel grinned at her. I'll just have a word with him now. And he strolled off with a lilt in his step. Manoli was very pleased that she'd suppressed the boys' misapprehension over the Fire Lizard's hatching. Sibel was so nice, and it wasn't as if Master Robinson had been upset at impressing the bronze. He genuinely hadn't cared a whit once Zare had impressed and was his very own, and if Master Robinson was content, the rest of the halls shouldn't quarrel. Then she worried about the girls' gossip. If the apprentices could take a simple switch like the hatching and derive deep insult from it, what had the girls done with her reputation at the hold? Look, Manoli, Peemer said, popping up beside her, I got a couple things to do now, but after dinner, you want me to take you around the gather? Seeing as how you haven't been to one. Here, that is. She readily agreed, curious to see just how his plans would affect his bargaining. He darted out of the hall then, the other boys hard on his heels. A few journeymen still lounged at the oval table, drinking claw, but most of the apprentices had dispersed. At the round table, Master Morshall now glowered darkly at her in solitary dignity. Manoli left the dining hall for the sanctuary of her room. Her fire lizards were curled up on the deep window ledge, their wings glinting brightly in the sun, but their jeweled eyes closed behind their several lids. Beauty stirred, raised her head, parted the outer lid, squeaked softly, and, when Manoli stroked her reassuringly, sighed and resumed her interrupted nap. From the vantage point of the second level, Manoli could see the square beyond the Harper Hall and the broad roadway. There was already considerable activity. Bird beasts moving up the river road, their slow, long stride one of indolence rather than labor under heavy weight. Stalls were being assembled, forming a loose square about an open space. Tables and benches were already in place, facing the dance square, for dancing there would surely be, with 100 or more harpers to do the playing. There'd be more dancing than she'd ever seen, and probably different dances from the once popular inner sea hold. Oh, this would be a grand gather. Her first here, and her first since thread started falling. Manoli caught sight of the girls emerging from the cot, brightly clad, with filmy scarves to protect their hair from the light wind. Oh, what she'd like to do to their hair. Pona's hair with its long, neat plaits to be pulled out by the roots. Manoli stopped her thoughts, a little appalled at the intensity of her dislike. After all, the girls had failed in their aim to prejudice Lord Grohe against her. Why was she bothering her head about them? She'd better things to occupy herself with. She was an apprentice harper, not a sometime student. She was Master Robinson's apprentice. Of course, since he was master of the Harper Hall, everyone within was his apprentice. But she was an apprentice, and she intended to remain one. more than ever now that the girls had made an effort to jeopardize her tenure. She was going to stay, despite them and her parents. She was going to make her place here because this was where she belonged, as Master Robinson had said. Here was where she could perform her music.
Mom, you're lucky there's 2 milk jugs.
Oh my God, drink that before you spill it. Here she could make her own place for herself, not slip into a spot left by someone else, anyone else. Just as she'd made the cave her own, she would make her own place here in the Harper Hall. And no one, particularly a sneaky little twitterhead whose only claim to importance was being someone's granddaughter, was going to dislodge her. Or a conniving coward like copholder Dunca. Manoli wondered if Sylvina had done anything about settling rumors. Really, it just wasn't important, Manoli told herself sternly, particularly when Lord Grohe seemed to approve of her and had actually suggested that she help him train his queen, Murga. Manoli laughed to herself. Just wait till those girls heard about that. She, apprentice trainer of fire lizards, the only successful one on Perm. The teacher just one step ahead of the student. She giggled now, covering her mouth with her hands because she knew she was acting the wary. But she'd been silly not to see before that she had several tunes to play in this Harper Hall. The tunes she made, her fire lizards, yes, and how to gut fish and trim sail whenever some Harper needed to know. And what did Sibel need to know? She sighed gustily.
Let me guess, we're never going to find out?
You'll find out. Too bad about those girls, though. She wished Godiva didn't have to stay with them. She was above the general sort of the cot, and it would have been nice to have a girlfriend. Not that she didn't have a good friend in Peemer. When Peemer grew up and lost his brilliant voice, would he have to leave the craft hole? No, because they must surely be training him to play one of those other tunes. She didn't quite see him stepping into Master Schonager's slippers. She rose from the window ledge, reminded of the task that Master Robinson had set her as his apprentice. She tuned her guitar and began to rehearse the Breckie song, softly lest the Harper was busy in his rooms. Did he honestly think that song, a twiddle to while the time away until Sibel returned, was good enough to be perfected? Of her own volition, her fingers were plucking out the melody. She found herself caught up once more in the poignancy of Breckie's anguished command, "Don't leave me alone." She played the song through, agreeing with the Harper that the fourth phrase needed polishing. Ah, yes, if she dropped to the fifth, it would intensify the phrase and complement the chord. The toast had rang for the mealtime, finally, and shouts and laughter broke her concentration. She was almost angry with the disruption, but with a renewed awareness of her surroundings, she realized how her hand ached. Her back and neck muscles were stiff from crouching over the guitar. She'd no idea she'd been practicing that long, but the song was set in her mind and her fingers now. She would have it finished in next to no time once she had more ink in those paper sheets. She changed into the clothes she wanted to wear to the gather, not as rich as the girls would be wearing, but new. The close-woven trousers and the contrasting colored tunic with the sleeveless hide jumper displaying the apprentice badge meant more to her than fine cloth and filmy scarves. As she pulled on her slippers, she noticed that the constant scuffing on the stone floors was wearing soles and toes out. At least here she needn't fear to approach Sylvina, and perhaps her feet were healed enough for proper boots, which would last longer.